This is an odd thing for a lot of you probably to hear, but farmers will soon be able to fix their own farm equipment. It's a big deal. It took a new agreement between the American Farm Bureau Federation and John Deere.
72 hours. That's how much warning nearly 200 American workers got before their entire world collapsed. Case IH and John Deere executed the most ruthless betrayal in agricultural history, eliminating over 4,500 American jobs while celebrating $10 billion in profits. Families who had built tractors for generations were told to apply overseas if they wanted work. The Ottumwa Works facility shut down during Christmas, leaving 400 workers without paychecks during the holiday season. How can companies generating $10 billion in profits justify such calculated cruelty? What happens when the equipment feeding America breaks and replacement parts are trapped overseas for months? Why are farmers now building their own tractors in barns across the Midwest? Stick till the end, because this is not just about tractors. It's about the systematic destruction of rural America. The domino effect begins. The factory closures triggered an economic avalanche that buried entire communities. Within weeks, small businesses that had relied on steady income from Case IH and John Deere workers began folding at alarming rates. Main Street establishments that had served factory families for decades found their customer base evaporating overnight. Local dealerships faced immediate catastrophe. Many had exclusive contracts with Case IH, having invested heavily in training technicians and maintaining millions of dollars in inventory. They discovered that shipping routes had been quietly rerouted while corporate brochures promised prosperous futures. The supply chain meltdown created unprecedented chaos for farmers. Spare parts that once arrived within days became mired in customs backlogs, stretching 6 weeks or longer. Recent data revealed a threefold increase in urgent service calls, with dealers reporting shelves completely empty of critical components. In Iowa, farmers reported unstoppable mechanical breakdowns that left fields half-planted during narrow seasonal windows. Instead of contacting local dealers for same-day parts pickup, they found themselves waiting day after costly day for components stuck in overseas transit, watching potential profits rot in storage. Some farmers resorted to three-dimensional printing solutions, creating makeshift replacement parts using online blueprints. Others engaged in jury-rigging techniques their grandfathers might have recognized from the Great Depression, cobbling together solutions from scrap metal when corporate supply chains failed completely. County budgets teetered on collapse as Case IH and John Deere tax contributions disappeared. Property values declined as families faced foreclosure without steady employment. Churches organized emergency food drives for families who had never needed assistance. Yet even as rural America reeled from this assault, the corporate perpetrators were implementing strategies that would prove far more devastating. The numbers don't lie. The financial mathematics revealed the calculated nature of corporate decision-making that prioritized profit margins over community survival. The United States agricultural machinery market, valued at $39.4 billion in 2024, had become a chessboard where multinational corporations moved pieces without regard for communities left behind. John Deere's financial performance exposed brutal corporate priorities. Despite generating $10.166 billion in profits during 2023, the company simultaneously implemented massive layoffs affecting thousands of American workers. The agricultural giant projected earnings would decrease to $5 billion in 2025, yet chose devastating cost-cutting over reduced executive compensation. Market conditions provided convenient justification for community abandonment. The United States Department of Agriculture forecasted major raw crop cash receipts declining 16% in 2024, following an 8% drop in 2023. Corn prices had fallen 37% from 2022 levels. Soybeans dropped 24%, and wheat declined 37%. However, these conditions affected farmers far more severely than the corporations supposedly serving them. With 2 million farms covering 900 million acres, the average operation spanning 441 acres struggled when equipment failures could cost tens of thousands in ruined crops. Net farm income projections showed a 4.4% decrease, equivalent to $6.5 billion in reduced income for families actually producing America's food supply. Financial institutions recognized the crisis and began tightening credit for agricultural businesses. Banks, worried about loan defaults, started shutting out farmers who depended on credit for equipment purchases. This credit squeeze accelerated bankruptcies, forcing family farms, some passed down through multiple generations, to sell operations that had sustained rural communities for decades. The mathematical reality painted a clear picture. Corporate executives had chosen short-term profit maximization over long-term community partnership, calculating that foreign manufacturing offered better returns than loyalty to American workers. What they hadn't calculated was the explosive political backlash that would soon threaten their entire business model. We pulled the financials, crop forecasts, and market data to connect the dots no one else would. Now you see why farm income is crashing, while executive pay keeps climbing. If that saved you hours of digging, tap subscribe and help us keep going. When loyalty breaks, the betrayal cut deeper than economics. It severed emotional bonds connecting rural families to corporate brands for over a century. In communities where John Deere green and Case IH red symbolized generational identity and agricultural heritage, the factory closures felt like personal attacks on everything these families had built their lives around. Fourth-generation John Deere families found themselves walking away from brand loyalty that had defined their family identity since the Great Depression. Farmers who had proudly displayed corporate logos on equipment, work clothes, and home decorations began covering symbols that once represented pride in American agricultural excellence. Local dealerships reported unprecedented numbers, switching to European competitors like Fendt, Massey Ferguson, and Claas, attracted by superior repair policies and genuine customer service commitment. John Deere's desperate response, launching red to green discount campaigns with trade-in bonuses, only emphasized how completely the company had miscalculated farmer resentment depth. European machinery revealed advantages American manufacturers had ignored while pursuing profit maximization. Unlike their American counterparts, European companies refused to lock equipment behind proprietary software, preventing farmers from performing maintenance. This fundamental difference resonated with agricultural communities, valuing independence and self-sufficiency over corporate convenience. High school football teams that had proudly worn John Deere sponsorship patches found themselves searching for new supporters. Local parades featuring elaborate agricultural machinery displays suddenly showcased European tractors instead of American brands. Community festivals celebrating agricultural heritage struggled maintaining traditions when honored companies had abandoned the communities that built their success. In coffee shops across the Midwest, conversations that once celebrated American agricultural innovation now focused on foreign alternatives. Farmers shared stories praising Fendt tractor reliability during planting season, noting repair simplicity made them practical choices when corporate service networks proved unreliable. Trade schools quietly removed Case, 1H, and John Deere specific training programs, recognizing students needed skills applicable to European machinery brands, actually supporting American farmers. Educational institutions that had partnered with American manufacturers for decades found themselves developing relationships with foreign companies, demonstrating genuine commitment to rural communities. Yet beneath this surface transformation, something far more dangerous was brewing, a grassroots movement that would challenge the very foundations of corporate agricultural dominance. Mexico beckons. What if the biggest threat wasn't foreign competition, but domestic abandonment? Corporate executives at John Deere and Case IH had been orchestrating their American exodus for years, while publicly promising job security to the very workers they planned to discard. Leaked memos revealed that top brass had been discussing overseas expansion plans for at least 3 years, even as they issued reassuring statements about domestic manufacturing commitments. Brazil greeted Case IH expansion with open arms, offering tax incentives and minimal labor restrictions. The South American nation positioned itself as the perfect alternative to expensive American workers who demanded fair wages, healthcare benefits, and safe working conditions. Politicians in Brazil touted their success in attracting a global brand once synonymous with Midwestern grit. India promised reduced tariffs on high-volume machinery production, creating additional incentives for companies seeking to maximize profit margins. John Deere's Mexico strategy proved particularly calculated, announcing plans to move manufacturing from its Dubuque, Iowa facility to Mexico by 2026, when Donald Trump threatened 200% tariffs on Mexican-built John Deere products. Corporate executives simply continued their relocation timeline, Corporate messaging emphasized global optimization, as though community destruction was inevitable rather than deliberate strategic choice. Executives defended decisions as necessary adaptations to market realities, arguing that American production costs were too high to remain competitive. This rationale conveniently ignored decades of community investment, worker loyalty, and government subsidies supporting their operations. The new production hubs promised faster turnaround times and lower wages, but critics pointed out that quality control would suffer when manufacturing moved thousands of miles from engineering centers. The craftsmanship that made American agricultural machinery legendary seemed destined to become another casualty of corporate cost-cutting. Across the Atlantic, European manufacturers recognized the strategic opportunity created by American corporate short-sightedness. Europe's agricultural invasion. European manufacturers didn't just step into the void. They stormed in with superior strategies that exposed how completely John Deere and Case IH had misjudged farmer priorities. Brands like Fendt, Massey Ferguson, and Claas leveraged reputations for quality and engineering excellence to reshape the United States farming landscape. The key differentiator wasn't just build quality, it was philosophy. Unlike American counterparts, European companies refused to lock equipment behind proprietary software, preventing farmers from performing basic maintenance. This fundamental respect for customer independence resonated powerfully with agricultural communities, valuing self-sufficiency over corporate control. European governments played strategic roles contrasting sharply with American corporate approaches. In Germany and France, agriculture ministries directly supported machinery manufacturers, emphasizing the strategic importance of maintaining robust equipment exports. Subsidies and export incentives allowed European companies to offer competitive pricing, while American brands struggled with soaring production costs. Dealerships across Iowa and Nebraska began stocking European tractors, their shiny models rolling off transport trucks to replace absent Case IH inventory. Farmers, initially hesitant to abandon long-standing loyalties, began experimenting with alternatives, discovering that European engineering often exceeded American standards they had assumed were unmatched. Stories emerged of farmers praising smooth operation and reliability of Fendt tractors during critical planting seasons. The simplicity of repairs, no software locks, readily available parts, straightforward diagnostics made European machinery practically superior when American corporate service networks proved unreliable. European brands began occupying more dealership space, pushing out remaining American models that dealers struggled to support without reliable parts supplies. The balance of power in agricultural machinery was shifting in ways that threatened to permanently alter competitive dynamics. American corporate executives watching these developments finally recognized the scope of their strategic miscalculation, but their responses would prove too little, too late. The supply chain catastrophe. Modern farming operations couldn't afford endless shipping delays, yet that's exactly what American corporate relocations delivered. Critical parts that once moved seamlessly between domestic facilities now got stuck in international customs procedures, creating bottlenecks that could sabotage entire harvest seasons when timing meant everything. The mathematics of agricultural operations left no room for supply chain chaos. When equipment breaks during narrow seasonal windows, spring planting or fall harvest, farmers have days, not weeks, to restore functionality before losing entire crop years. One broken part arriving late could mean tens of thousands of dollars and ruin production. Recent data revealed crisis severity. Dealers reported threefold increases in urgent service calls while maintaining completely empty shelves of critical components. Parts that previously arrived within 24 hours now required 6 weeks or longer, assuming they cleared customs without additional delays. Iowa farmers shared devastating stories of unstoppable mechanical breakdowns, leaving fields half-planted during optimal weather conditions, instead of same-afternoon parts pickup enabling completion of time-sensitive operations. They found themselves counting costly days, while essential components remained trapped in overseas shipping networks. Innovation born from desperation became both inspiring and heartbreaking. Some farmers resorted to three-dimensional printing solutions, downloading blueprints, and creating makeshift replacement parts using local workshops. Others employed jury-rigging techniques their grandfathers used during the Great Depression, cobbling together solutions from scrap metal when corporate supply chains failed completely. Related industries felt the impact as farming operations struggled with unreliable machinery. Grain elevators faced scheduling chaos when harvest equipment couldn't maintain consistent operation. Transportation companies lost business as farmers couldn't reliably deliver crops to market. Financial institutions recognized the emerging crisis and began tightening credit availability for agricultural operations facing equipment reliability problems. Banks worried about loan defaults when farmers couldn't maintain productive operations due to corporate supply chain failures. The supply chain catastrophe was pushing rural America toward a breaking point that would trigger unprecedented political responses. The profit paradox. John Deere's financial performance during 2023 exposed brutal corporate priorities. Despite generating $10.166 billion in profits, the company simultaneously implemented devastating layoffs affecting thousands of American workers. The agricultural giant projected earnings decreasing to $5 billion in 2025, yet chose community destruction over modest profit reduction. Executive compensation packages remained untouched, while factory workers faced unemployment. Corporate boardrooms justified massive layoffs as necessary cost-cutting while maintaining executive bonuses and shareholder dividends. The disconnect between executive priorities and worker welfare became impossible to ignore as communities bore the costs of corporate efficiency strategies. Stock market reactions revealed investor enthusiasm for corporate cost-cutting announcements. Share prices increased when companies announced factory closures and workforce reductions, creating perverse incentives that rewarded community destruction. Financial markets celebrated efficiency improvements that devastated rural economies. The globalization benefits flowing to corporate executives and shareholders contrasted sharply with costs imposed on American workers and communities. Multinational companies captured savings from cheaper foreign labor, while rural America absorbed unemployment, reduced tax revenues, and economic disruption. Corporate survival narratives obscured deliberate strategic choices that prioritized shareholder returns over community partnerships. Executives framed relocations as inevitable responses to global competition, rather than decisions that sacrificed long-term relationships for short-term profit maximization. Rural America was bearing the costs of efficiency improvements that primarily benefited distant shareholders and corporate executives. The mathematical reality couldn't be ignored. Corporate executives had chosen profit maximization over community loyalty, calculating that foreign manufacturing offered better financial returns than maintaining domestic partnerships. The political machine was finally ready to respond to this systematic assault on American communities. Washington enters the fray. Your retirement savings just became a bargaining chip in a trade war. When news of Case IH's abrupt shutdown spread, the political machine kicked into high gear as rural America found itself in shock. Factories that had employed generations were shuttered, and the sense of betrayal was palpable as politicians, sensing growing outrage, knew they had to respond. Leading the charge was President Donald Trump, promising to bring manufacturing back to the United States. Speaking to crowds in Iowa and Ohio, he framed the Case IH closure as a betrayal of American workers, declaring, "We're not just going to sit back and let them take our jobs. We're going to make it harder for them to abandon our workers." His proposed solution was clear: impose tariffs on agricultural machinery manufactured abroad, particularly those produced by companies that had abandoned United States workers. The 200% tariff threat on John Deere products built in Mexico sent shockwaves through corporate boardrooms. Senators in affected states demanded investigations into potential labor violations. Case IH's legal team was on high alert, aware that revelations about premeditated shutdowns could open them to bad faith claims. The federal government introduced new incentives to encourage manufacturing in rural areas, though corporate boards remained resistant. Democratic candidates focused on local resilience. Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio proposed comprehensive packages offering subsidies to small farmers struggling to replace equipment and grants to communities impacted by corporate shutdowns. Despite political differences, bipartisan momentum emerged. Bills aimed at protecting rural economies from sudden corporate exits began surfacing in both the Senate and House. The message was clear: companies could no longer abandon rural America without consequences. On factory floors across the Midwest, workers were organizing their own response. Workers Fight Back. The farmer-led backlash across the Midwest spawned a movement built on resilience and local ingenuity. Faced with machinery they couldn't afford or repair, farmers banded together to innovate on their own terms, creating solutions that corporate America had failed to provide. Cooperative repair hubs became the most successful initiatives. Farmers pooled resources to buy diagnostic tools and machinery parts, setting up shared spaces where anyone could bring equipment for maintenance. Skilled mechanics, many recently laid off Case IH workers, volunteered time teaching others how to repair not just old Case IH models, but also newer, more complex tractors from Europe and China. Some entrepreneurial farmers created small startups focused on open-source machinery, designed with simplicity in mind, robust, easily repaired, and free from restrictive software locks. One cooperative in Nebraska managed to build a prototype tractor running on locally sourced biofuel, reducing dependency on traditional fuel supplies controlled by distant corporations. Social media amplified the movement as farmers shared blueprints, repair guides, and success stories. "We're done relying on companies that don't care about us," one farmer declared in a viral video. "If they're not going to build what we need, we'll do it ourselves." The spirit of self-reliance proved infectious. Rural innovation transcended fixing tractors. It became a statement about reclaiming independence and resisting corporate overreach. The movement evolved into political force, pushing for right-to-repair laws, guaranteeing farmers the ability to fix their own equipment. Major lawsuits were filed, alleging that restricting repair access violated consumer rights. John Deere and other manufacturers lobbied hard to block legislative bills, arguing that unlocking software could pose safety risks. For farmers, the issue was fundamental: controlling the tools they needed to survive. The legal system was about to weigh in on this unprecedented challenge. Lawsuits and legal battles. 1 week after the first factory padlock snapped shut, a flurry of lawsuits set the stage for a legal showdown that would determine whether corporations could abandon communities without consequences. Dealers accused Case IH of deliberately withholding vital information for months, leaving small businesses with no time to pivot as many teetered on bankruptcy. Farmers filed claims, arguing they were baited into long-term contracts by a company that planned to reduce United States service capacity all along. The legal arguments centered on whether corporate global optimization strategies constituted bad faith when companies accepted community investments while secretly planning relocations. Case IH's corporate attorneys pushed back, contending that global restructuring was standard business practice. Their argument might hold if they could prove no explicit contract guaranteed domestic operations, but leaked memos revealing years of secret planning undermined claims that relocations were reactive responses to market conditions. Rival brands sensed an opening as John Deere rolled out trade-in bonuses to tempt loyal Case IH customers. Kubota offered fast parts turnaround to any farmer willing to switch brands. This wave of incentives, rolled out days after Case IH's announcement, further isolated the red brand from buyers nursing feelings of betrayal. A court filing out of Iowa suggested top executives could be compelled to release internal documents detailing their timeline for each factory closure. If confirmed, that evidence might rewrite the entire narrative, possibly fueling more outrage or opening doors for long-neglected restitution. The question remained whether legal remedies could address systematic corporate betrayal of rural communities. The grassroots revolution. Out of desperation, rural America began to innovate in ways that challenged fundamental assumptions about agricultural production. Local governments formed partnerships with small-scale manufacturers to produce affordable, repairable machinery that prioritized durability and local support over profit maximization. These startups, often run by former Case IH workers, understood farming operations in ways that distant corporate executives never could. By creating smaller, community-focused production hubs, they provided both jobs for displaced workers and reliable equipment for farmers abandoned by multinational corporations. Farmers' cooperatives became increasingly common as groups pooled resources to buy shared machinery, reducing individual costs while building stronger community connections. This cooperative ownership model not only saved money, but but fostered renewed community spirit among farmers who had previously seen each other as competitors. Repair workshops sprang up offering maintenance for older tractors and teaching repair skills to younger farmers. This represented a return to self-reliance driven by necessity, as corporate service networks had proven unreliable when companies relocated operations thousands of miles from their customer base. Technology companies joined the movement as startups specializing in open-source farming solutions developed modular machinery that could be repaired with basic tools rather than proprietary corporate systems. These innovations challenged the fundamental business model that had made agricultural equipment increasingly complex and expensive to maintain. University partnerships with rural communities created research initiatives focused on practical agricultural challenges rather than corporate profit maximization. Agricultural colleges began developing techniques that served local farming conditions instead of global commodity markets controlled by distant corporations. The transformation was entering its most critical phase. Rising from the ashes. How does an industry giant fall? One decision at a time. How does a community rise? The same way. When corporate America abandoned rural communities, something unexpected happened. Instead of accepting defeat, farmers and workers began building something better than what they had lost. Community-driven production hubs emerged from corporate betrayal. Former Case IH workers who understood machinery from decades on assembly lines started small manufacturing cooperatives that prioritized durability over profit margins. These weren't massive factories designed for global distribution. They were local operations focused on serving regional farming needs. The collapse of corporate-controlled repair networks sparked local innovation that corporate executives had never imagined possible. Fed up with restrictive software locks and costly authorized repairs, farmers established decentralized repair cooperatives that trained local mechanics to fix modern machinery without proprietary corporate systems. Technology startups targeting rural needs began developing modular machinery designed for easy upgrade and repair without specialized corporate technicians. These companies understood that farmers valued equipment longevity over planned obsolescence strategies that maximized corporate profits through forced replacement cycles. The transformation wasn't just about survival. It was about building agricultural systems that could thrive through innovation and community cooperation rather than corporate dependency. Yet the global marketplace was still shifting. The international reckoning. The global agricultural machinery landscape was undergoing permanent transformation as American corporate relocations created opportunities for international competitors. China's agricultural machinery manufacturers expanded production targeting markets in Africa and Latin America that had traditionally relied on American brands. European brand dominance in quality perception grew stronger as farmers discovered that companies like Fendt and Massey Ferguson offered superior customer service alongside engineering excellence. The reputation shift from American to European leadership in agricultural innovation seemed irreversible. American competitiveness was declining globally as the country lost both manufacturing capacity and technological leadership in agricultural equipment development. Trade relationships required restructuring as former allies questioned America's reliability as a long-term agricultural partner. Technology leadership transitions accelerated as research and development investments followed manufacturing relocations overseas. The innovation centers that had made American agricultural machinery legendary were being dismantled as corporate resources shifted to support foreign operations. Market share redistribution represented fundamental changes in global agricultural equipment supply chains that would persist long after immediate corporate relocations were completed. Countries that had welcomed American manufacturing investments were developing their own technological capabilities. Back in corporate boardrooms, executives were finally recognizing their strategic miscalculations. The rise from corporate ashes, once dominant in rural economies, Case IH and John Deere found themselves scrambling to regain trust. As their market share vanished, both brands launched recovery campaigns, but most farmers saw through the thin veneer. Case IH promised to reopen community-focused plants, But the limited scale suggested a media strategy more than an economic revival. John Deere, under pressure, rolled out diagnostic tools to allow farmers to perform their own repairs. Yet for many, this felt too little, too late. These gestures, however publicized, failed to erase years of offshoring, service monopolies, and abandonment during times of crisis. Farmers no longer measured value in slogans. They demanded proof, and proof, as it turns out, would take years to rebuild. Rural advocacy groups seized the moment. They pushed for legislation that would penalize companies for sudden exits and demanded enforceable contracts ensuring corporate accountability. But while corporations hesitated, rural America didn't wait. From the ashes emerged a decentralized agricultural ecosystem. Independent equipment builders focused on regional reliability. Small farms adopted precision tools tailored for sustainability rather than scale. Local food systems flourished. Direct-to-consumer models replaced anonymous supply chains. What once seemed like a collapse became a revolution. Communities no longer aimed to attract multinational attention. They built their own futures, and they did it together. So what happens next, when more towns realize they don't need corporations to survive, let alone thrive? Leave your thoughts below. Your voice matters here, and your insight helps drive the next story.